Hello and welcome to today's Lunchtime Research Talk, and it's our Research Week special. My name's Catherine Hemmelwright, Director of the CCA, and every lunchtime this week you can tune into a different talk over lunch with us here at CCA Derry, Londonderry and Ulster University. Over the week, different PhD researchers from UU will be presenting their research via Zoom in a bite-sized talk, followed by the opportunity for you to ask a question. Yeah, excuse me. The aim of these short lunchtime talks is to share with the wider world just some of the research that's taking place at Ulster University. And we're welcoming speakers this week from drama, performance, film, and screen studies. This talk will last no more than 30 minutes in total, including time for your questions and a conversation before we wrap up at 1:45. And you can see the archives from our previous season on our YouTube channel. Search CCA Derry Londonderry on YouTube to find it. And this week's talks will join them if you want to watch them again or catch any you may have missed. Thank you to Ulster University, especially to Dr. Brian Bridges, Dr. Catherine O'Hara and Professor Justin McGee, and to our funders, Arts Council of Northern Ireland, Derry City and Strabane District Council and Garfield Weston Foundation. Housekeeping. Please mute. Put your questions in the chat as we go along. We are recording, but we're not recording the Q&A. So thank you for joining us, and you can get to enjoy the bit that's really special, which is the Q&A in real time at the end. And of course, enjoy the speech, the presentation as we go along. So it's Tuesday. Today, I am pleased to introduce Sandra Fisher and her talk, Shaping Possibility, a deep dive into the creative process of making theatre for young audiences. Making theatre for young audiences is a distinct challenge. This presentation shines a light on the ecology of the practice that has emerged, underpinning values and processes and skills that have been honed to make work for this particular audience. Sandy is an experienced choreographer, community dance artist, and university lecturer. Her creative work has championed audience accessibility, rural touring, performance for families, children, and young audiences. Common themes for her research and teaching include collaboration, interdisciplinarity, and a passion for the importance of the creative arts as a part of everyday life. And over to Sandy.
Thank you, Catherine. So hello and welcome to this lunchtime discussion. And just to say thank you to Catherine and CCA, as well as the team at Ulster, for this opportunity to share my research. So as Catherine said, today I'll be talking about theatre for young audiences. But first, I just wanted to say a little bit more about myself. So I began my PhD journey as a mature student, beginning my studies after 25 plus years working as a dance artist, choreographing and directing performance work, creating and delivering community projects, and working as a lecturer and researcher in higher education. So most notably as an artist in residence and then a lecturer helping to set up and deliver the first BA Honours dance degree at Ulster University and on the island of Ireland. So I mentioned my background as this set of experiences is what underpins my PhD research, both the topic and the approach. So the fundamental questions that my research addresses comes from a place of reflection on my professional practice, as well as a desire to, and hopefully help innovate the practice I've been working within all these years. I also mention it because this is a set of experiences as both a practitioner with a research mindset and a researcher who explores through creative practice that very much informed my approach and shaped the project that I will talk to you about today. So on to the research. The starting point for my research was a really broad focus on the idea of the value of theatre for young audiences. So theatre for young audiences, or TYA, which is how I'll refer to it going forward, has emerged to become a form of theatre making in its own right, set apart from theatre making for adults, and identified as work being made for and with children and young people. It has undergone many different debates about its characteristics, and it's withstood really many attempts to define its essence and its purpose. So TYA is a distinct practice and it's thriving. it has established itself firmly as a genre of work shaped by its connection and duty of care to its audience. Early iterations of the practice saw artists developing work within the parameters of education and learning, with work identified as theatre in education, or TIE, and very much defined by a specific purpose and goal. Since these early characterizations, the work has evolved, and it's been fueled by artistic experimentation and the questioning and reflection of practitioners, academics, and sector professionals. Perspectives have shifted. So from Goldberg's definition in the 1970s of TYA as a formal theatrical experience in which a play is presented for an audience of children, all the way to Schoenmann's 2006 definition of TYA as a unique form of art with its own set of rules and conceptions, not merely a hybrid between theatre and education, but rather a complex and indivisible entity. So 20 years on from Schoenmann's description, and with the support of robust professional networks led by Assatage International, which is the International Association for Theatre for Children and Young People, the professional sector has developed new understandings, compelling definitions and descriptions of the purpose, role, and approach of theatre for young audiences. Significant reflection and investigation from academics, professional theatre organisations, and artists have focused on issues such as O'Master and Adkins, who talk about the role of adults. Spectatorial engagements, which is talked about by Weddell. Maguire talks about the child's voice, and Schoenmann talks about the contextual child, as well as Reason and Fletcher, who talk about spectatorship. So these are all debates which have helped shape current thinking and understanding of the nature of TYA as its own distinct practice. So in charting this journey in my research, it really became clear to me that TYA has struggled to shake its origins from theatre and education. And its legacy is one that's linked strongly to education as a tool for children to learn, and latterly in relation to developmental goals for children. Its existence has also been defined and redefined by social, cultural, ideological, economic, and political processes. And it could be argued that it has been defined and shaped by the political decisions that inform the funding of the arts world. And it has suffered from a questioning of its expertise and professionalism due to the age of its audiences. So context and purpose have dominated TYA and its public perception, with many attempts at a definition often focusing on its value in relation to its purpose, or about something called its otherness, and so what it is not. So in my research, I reflected on these understandings surrounding the practice. And from that reflection emerged two foundational principles for my study. And these were, one, that the kind of definitions and characterizations have coalesced around the agency of the audience, and the value of TYA has predominantly been articulated through its relationship to what Maguire terms extrinsic values. So what it does for others. And the second foundational principle for the study emerging was that there was a real acknowledgement that there's a knowledge gap in the field of study, and that gap was the intrinsic perspective. So an actual look at the creative process itself. So the way forward. Based on those two principles, the approach to the research is built around a working assumption that the practice itself can reveal knowledge about this gap and tell us more about the genre of TYA itself as it evolves, and hopefully reveal greater insight into its inherent value as an art form in its own right. This focus is supported from several perspectives. So Fletcher Watson, in 2016, in his exploration of early years work, he talked about a complex matrix of personal, emotional, and artistic skills that are specific to this type of work. Whereas Nicholson championed the importance of understanding atmosphere. And of course, we've got Maguire, who highlighted that one way we may look to differentiate TYA from other forms of practice is by looking to the specific processes and practices that they deploy. And then it's possible to identify the gaps in the stories of the practice. So the research question evolved and became, how do artists shape possibility? So the research focused on revealing those stories of the practice by exploring the complex matrix of personal, emotional, and artistic skills that are specific to this type of work. And as a starting point, I asked these three questions. You can see, what are the underlying components of its practice? What are the values that are inherent in the practice? And what are the conditions that inform the process? So my approach to this, these three questions inform the development of the methodological approach. And I used a case study approach. And in using the case study approach, I collated data by working alongside two theatre companies who were each in the process of making new performance work for young audiences. So the criteria for selection was strict. It's clear track record of creating performance work for young audiences, clear sector influencers, leaders of their field, and importantly, and this is a tricky one, they were starting or mid-process creating a new performance. Importantly, the projects had to be live projects to be true to my aim to explore the practice. So many challenges lay ahead in that. Finding the case studies, convincing the companies to participate, navigating funding cycles and production schedules in order to access a live creative process. So once those challenges were overcome and companies were identified and on board with being part of that research process, I set about refining how I would gain insight about a practice. So my approach centered around finding ways to ensure the practice was the primary subject and to try and draw out something called embodied knowledge that speaks of the process itself rather than from the perspective of an artist or a observer reflecting on the process. And this is quite important to me. So essentially what I was looking for was a way to interview the practice and not the practitioner. So thinking about Nicholson's discussion of atmosphere and my own experience of learning by being in action, I developed an approach I call biome research and a method I call the practice interview. So biome research is based on the principle of immersing yourself in an environment to absorb the processes and atmosphere, the landscape and the features to simultaneously document and question the ecology in the moment. The practice interview is a method for collecting data and what Burks refers to as contextually situated meaning by doing what Sean refers to as reflecting in action. So I like to describe this as listening to and not listening for. So to do this, I realized the important factor was to be exposed to the creative process, witnessing and being part of creative discussions, problems, solutions as the work developed. And the primary site of data collection would be in the studio and importantly in other creative spaces that the ideas and performance developed. So for example, in warm-up games, online, in workbooks, maybe in research materials, production meetings, telephone calls or sketchbooks, and over tea and cake at lunchtime. So techniques that I developed and used for the practice interview included the following. So if you look to the left of the slide, creative responsive tasks, which were creative or written or physical responses, mini conversations, which might be 2 or 3 minute conversations during the day, wherever was appropriate. And they could be documented in reflective writing or summarizing the focus of conversation or key points. Prompted autoethnography. So research and reflection in writing in response to the activities or events happening in the room. Diary documentation, so recording action, not reflection. Conversational documentation, which was noting keywords, sentences, and quite important to this one, noting all the questions that get asked in the creative process. Participation. Participating in creative tasks and noting the experience, so getting involved myself, reflective questioning and critical incident questioning, that was key as well. And biographical interviewing, maybe short, tiny interviews with open-ended questions to gain contextual information. So this information would be pieced together to create a portrait of the practice as a way to unpick values, approaches and conditions for making of the work. So this is a technique that I evolved from a practice called portraiture by Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. So key to the success of this approach was practitioner insight and embodied knowledge to help what McKinley calls wording the world. So what I'm trying to do is find a way to word the world. Importantly, whilst I recognised that my personal experience as a practitioner meant I could navigate the biomes more easily and be more aware or attuned to what to listen for, I did need to address the risk of researcher bias. To help do this, I drew from Sean's prioritising reflection in action whilst using reflection on action as a safeguard and a sense check. And in addition, if you look to the right of the slide, I developed some tenets of collecting data, which were embodiment, noticing, immersion, interaction, perspective, acclimatization, and orientation. So these were lenses that helped me be at once in the moment immersed, but also helped me safeguard objectivity. So my findings to date. Prominent features were beginning to emerge, and whilst not necessarily unique to TYA, they are clearly distinctive in how they're prioritised in this particular work. So these are the importance of the 360 perspective. So at any one time, the leaders of the project are engaged in multiple layers of considerations. So they're having to address problems from many, many different angles. So that 360 perspective is really important. The TYA ensemble, so the idea of collective problem solving, questioning, conversation, interdisciplinarity, collaboration. The idea of the knowledgeable performer, so what are the skills, the sensibilities and that idea of a special something. So quite often in talking to directors about how they recruit their performers, they would often say, well, you know, they do have technical skills and sensibilities and we know what they are. They're able to work with people. They are excellent at their drama skills. But there's that special something. And what we couldn't really get to the bottom of was what is that special something? There was also creating an experience, not a performance. So this is the concept of that it's about being immersed, being involved, and not about presenting. So in essence, the idea of decentering the autonomy, it's about the collective, not the individual. The other feature that began to emerge was the distinctive development process. Now, this is very funding development dependent, but actually the process being a long process, sometimes weeks, days, months, perhaps even years, in order to arrive at the final creative product. And finally, something which underpins, and a lot has been talked about, but it must be mentioned, the idea of audience as guide. And that can be in many ways as a co-collaborator, as a creative consultant. It can be about just bearing in mind the age and the purpose of the work that you are doing. So breaking down this further reveals identified characteristics or sensibilities along with the elements and conditions. So a snapshot of these findings can be seen here. There are many, many more, but I just threw up a few for you to have a look at. And I collected them as I went along through the analysis. So I've presented them here in a kind of almost manifesto way. So it's about the characteristics and sensibilities that were bubbling up in the room. So yes to being present all the time, yes to collaboration, yes to development time, yes to creative identity or project values. And so this is an ongoing document that keeps moving. And secondly, I'll just talk you through this, which is where I've got to, which is the idea of the elements and conditions that are present and that I'm finding that are key. So if you look at the table, we see a line at the left-hand side, which is the elements, the orchestrator, the players, the ethos, the flow, and the mindset. So they're the kind of key elements that are present in the room that are essential to the action happening. And then in the second column, we've got conditions, and I talk about them in terms of conditions of attunement. So what is activating that creativity in particular in this context? And then finally, I've just got a little bit of an explanation about what I mean. And this is developing for me. So this is where I'm at the moment. So if we look, we've got the orchestrator, they're the directors, the leaders of the project. They are conditions of attunement, as I mentioned, is those layers of perspective, that kind of immersion, that all-encompassing way of approaching problems and questions. And that's aware of priorities, partnerships, agendas, and goals. Then we have the players, which are the performers. And that idea of the knowledgeable performer I spoke about. So they have discipline skills, they have interpersonal skills and embodied skills. The ethos, so this was really present, the values in the room, the collective values of the project, the company, the performers, and that's being aware of and aligned to those collective values in the discipline field. Then there's something called the flow, which is present, and that's the interplay. All those collaborations and the process journey, that iteration and reflection that happens between the players in the room and the co-creation, the consultancy, the interdisciplinarity, collaboration. And finally, that mindset. And that was a special something that I spoke about. So at the moment, we're scratching the surface with this, but it's starting to reveal that that's about audience and empathy. It's about presence and being in the moment. It's about being reactive and responsive. It's about leaving the ego at the door and creating an experience, not a performance, and potentially an improvisational approach. So this is developing, it will be added to, but that's where I'm at the moment. So finally, I'm working on a process score. And that is, for me, a way of visualizing a set of considerations for a creative practitioner to become what I call more attuned to the creative process of TYA. My assertion is that being attuned in this way, being practicing these skills and sensibilities, what characterizes theatre for young audiences. It unlocks the values and identities of the practice in and of itself. So just to wrap up, I envisage that this can be used as a teaching tool for practitioners in training, a creative tool for both new and experienced practitioners to work creatively, and as a way of supporting a language for artists to advocate for their experience. So the continuing aim of the research is to better understand the practice itself as a distinct art form with its own ethos, processes, and in doing so work towards that new language to support the articulation of the practice and its identity and values of the approach and form. The overarching goal is to generate knowledge to add to the current understanding of the identity of TYA. And finally, it's hoped that this knowledge will have value in the future training or professional development of practitioners, can support advocacy for artists, their expertise, value, and the conditions for making work. So thank you for listening today.
Thank you so much, Sandy, for sharing your research with us and for everyone for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording now and invite you to turn your cameras on and mics on, and let's have a conversation.